Hi, everybody. You've got Cindy and Sandy here from the Georgina Marathon and Half Marathon coming soon, Sunday, September 10th, 2023. And today we have Anthony Wolf with us from the Gatorade Sports Science Institute. Anthony, do you want to let everyone know a little bit about yourself and about Gatorade Sports Science Institute?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for inviting me on. I'll start with the GSSI in general, and then maybe work down the ladder to myself. So GSSI in general it stands for the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, and we do science education and research into ways that we can help athletes optimize their performance and health through mostly through nutrition and different interventions, looking at recovery and things like that. Myself in particularly, I work at our Frisco, Texas laboratory, which is just north of Dallas. For those who might be in the area, we're technically located at the Star, which is the home of the Dallas Cowboys. And my role is really around looking at the athlete readiness in team sport athletes, and in certain cases in some of our more elite individual sport athletes too.
Great.
Okay, great. So we wanted to have you come on today to talk a little bit about, I guess, first of all, the products that are available for our athletes here in Canada for this race, but also what's the difference between them?
Yeah, for sure. So we kind of have a spectrum portfolio, I would say. Has Gatorade, so there's the general Gatorade thirst quencher, and then there's what we would call G2, which kind of has half the amount of carbohydrate in it, and then G0, which has zero carbohydrate in it, and then lastly, which would be kind of our newest product, is called Gator Light. That has about 14 grams of carbohydrates in it, but it has a specialized blend of electrolytes in it. And that's supposed to kind of help hydrate us a little bit better. That specialized blend will help us retain the water, the fluid that we're taking in, and use that better, for hydration purposes, whether that's, during or after or even before exercise.
So how would we decide which one of those to use? So I see runners that I train with using the thirst quencher, which we all know, and then I see others using G2 or G0 while running. How do we know which one to choose?
Yeah, so there could be a couple of different factors in that one, and that some of that might be or in that question, I suppose, and some of that might be the amount and type of exercise we're doing, and then some of that might be just due to our own personal physiology. So when we exercise, generally speaking, for an endurance athlete, there is a recommended amount of carbohydrate to intake per hour. That's recommended by various groups like the American College of Sports Medicine, for instance. Usually that's somewhere between 30 to 60 grams per hour, depending on the intensity that we're running at. So that's a fairly high intensity for 30 to 60 grams per hour. So that's one of the ways we might look at the products and say which one's right for us. Would be what's the intensity and what's the duration of the exercise. So the higher the intensity, the more likely it is that we'll need to bring on board additional carbohydrates during that exercise, right? We want to make sure that we're fueled to give our best performance, whether that's competition or practice. The second part of that would be kind of the amount of sodium that is in the products. That could also help dictate which product might be right for us. When we sweat during exercise, we're actually losing more than just water. There's sodium, there's chloride in that. Sometimes you can lose potassium and other types of minerals in our sweat too. But the biggest one that we lose is sodium. So there is kind of a spectrum for how much sodium a person might lose. We kind of need to know our sweat rate and our sodium loss to get there. But generally speaking, if we're someone who sweats a lot and maybe we kind of have those white stains on our clothes when we're done, that means we're losing a lot of sodium. So we should probably look at a product that might have more sodium in it. And that might push us more towards that Gator Light product I was talking about earlier. That has quite a high amount of sodium in it.
And so when we're training, and let's say we're training for a marathon, since we're organizing the marathon and half marathon, is it smart of us to try to take in something towards the higher end of that 30 to 60 grams and get our body used to that? Or is it smarter for us to, stick to the 30 where there's less calories going in?
Yeah, I think there's probably two things that I would think about when I'm trying to decide, which end where I might run. And again, that might be the intensity that I'm running at. But to your point, it's the first point you brought up. It's probably not good to go ahead and start with that 60 grams per hour if you've never had carbohydrates during a run before.
Mhm.
We kind of have to train our gut to accept that amount of carbohydrates. I'm sure everybody's seen, that individual at the race that maybe hasn't prepared well, and then they have like a bunch of goos and some carbohydrate drinks and all that, and then they've got a ton of GI stress going on. And that's not to say that maybe they couldn't have taken in all of that for their race. It's just that maybe they hadn't trained using that. So, you get to your race, you're not used to it.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
yeah.
a key thing that I think that people don't do, is exactly what you said. They think about training their body, but they don't think about training their gut. They don't want to take in so many calories on their runs because they're trying to get lean, but then on race day, suddenly they're going to take Gatorade and gels the whole way. So one thing that I hope gets driven home, just even by this conversation, is that people should train with calories. They should train with carbohydrates, and they should get their body used to whatever it is that they're going to take in on race day.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. How are you going to know how you're going to perform on race day if you don't try it out on your training days either? It's also good to just take it in, to make sure that we're fueled for our next training day, right?
Mhm.
We have to replenish everything that we're losing. Each run, we're going to be burning glycogen, and we're going to be burning, whatever sugar stores we have in our bloodstream at the time. So it makes sense just to try to be prepared for our next run and replenish while we're exercising too.
And do you have a recommendation on what to do for recovery as far as that is concerned? Is there a carbohydrate number recommendation, or the Gatorade protein bar? Is that something they should do post run?
Yeah, there's been some really interesting research that's come out recently, um, that I wouldn't necessarily say, a buck's a trend, but definitely a long-term thought that endurance athletes might not need quite as much protein, as team sport athletes or something like that. We know that's not really true anymore. Endurance athletes might even need more protein just because of all the heavy pavement pounding that goes on. So generally speaking, following exercise, we like to use about 0.3 grams per kilo of body weight as our intake. If you're someone that's around 70 kilos, that's usually somewhere between 20 and 25 grams of protein. If you're a little heavier, maybe that's a little bit more. If you're a little lighter, maybe that's a little bit less. But generally speaking, that's a pretty decent amount of protein to get in relatively soon. Um, if you could take whole foods, for sure, whole foods are definitely the way to go. But that's what the protein bar is for. Is not everybody right after exercise can eat a meal. Uh,
Mhm.
so sometimes it's easier to just grab the bar and
Yeah. And they need to get that in, right, within like a 30 to 60-minute window. Is that right?
so the anabolic window, which I think is what the general media termed it, is a little bit of a misnomer. There's been some more recent research that's come out that says that maybe that's not quite as important as we used to think. But generally speaking, as soon as possible is always a good goal, to get it in, because the longer we wait, the less primed our body is to kind of accept some of those nutrients.
Yeah.
So I think a good rule of thumb is for sure if you can do it within 60 minutes, yeah. But if that's not feasible, then as soon as possible works as well.
So they're gonna go. They're gonna go for their run. They're gonna drink their Gatorade, get their 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour through Gatorade and gels. They're gonna get back to their car, have a Gatorade protein bar, and go home and eat some food.
Yeah, darn right. That's the way to do it. Get our
Awesome.
protein and our glycogen in there.
Fantastic.
That works. So then what, there people are going to be saying, well, I'm only a 5K runner or a 10K runner, or, oh, I've been fine with just water all along. So how do we talk to people about that? So what sort of needs do they have that are different? Or for example, if someone's an elite runner and hopefully they've got more experience with what their body, how their body will react. But, the perception about, oh, I'm only doing this, and so water's fine. What would you say to someone who's giving you that kind of a rationale?
Yeah, I certainly think, which event you're going to be competing in makes certainly makes a difference. Again, most of the most of the institutions that put out the nutrition guidelines around exercise or nutrition recommendations, if you prefer that word, base it around time and intensity. So if you're somebody who can run, if you could do a 5K, fairly quickly, and we're not even, you know, under an hour's worth of exercise, under a half an hour's worth of exercise, for that person, making sure that you've had your carbohydrates the day before and that your glycogen stores are topped up is probably more important than having them during the run. For that person, maybe water is okay. But once we start getting into the longer duration, the longer runs, we certainly that's when we want to think about having more than just water. We want to think about adding some sodium, think about adding some carbohydrate into our, during race routines. And I think the same thing can be said, for the elite runners too, right? If you think about those, breaking 2 hours, you're probably not going to want to really have a ton in your stomach when you're running that fast. So it doesn't make sense to go that route. But if we're, maybe we're in an age group, maybe we're somebody who, runs a 4-hour marathon, we want to make sure that we're hydrated throughout that whole process, because we could be losing, a liter of sweat per hour, right? And if we're running for 4 hours, we've just lost 4 liters of fluid. You're certainly going to have some performance decrements when we're talking about, being that dehydrated from exercise. So that's kind of how I would think about it.
How much does weather play into it in terms of heat or cold?
Yeah, it's plays a major factor. Both temperature and humidity. They're going to be kind of, I would say, not necessarily the number one, but maybe the number two factor is determining what our sweat rate actually is. So what the amount of sweat we lose per hour. Generally speaking, in hotter weather, we see kind of a larger performance decrement when we are dehydrated. So you can think about, if we were to lose about 2% of our body mass and fluid, that's when we start to see performance decline in terms of dehydration in the heat. If we're talking about it in terms of cold water, you can raise that up a little bit more. It seems that people can generally tolerate a little bit more dehydration in cold weather. So that jumps up to 3 to 4% of body weight loss from fluid. But generally speaking, if we stay within that 2% range, a little bit less, we're doing pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Do you take a look at the hyponatremia was sort of identified and as a real challenge for people I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. Is hyponatremia still a consideration or concern?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is. There's kind of a couple ways that we can find ourselves in that hyponatremia zone. One of them may be losing too much sodium, and one of them actually might be taking in too much fluid for how much sodium we're losing, right? So if you think we're losing a lot of sodium and we're only taking in fluid that doesn't have sodium, that's when it starts to really be a problem. So usually adding in some sodium into your whatever fluid you're drinking. So whether that's, if you're, Gatorade obviously has sodium in it, but if you are having, you're a fast runner and you just need a little bit of sodium in your beverage, maybe sprinkle a little bit of sea salt in there. Can do the trick as well.
But it goes beyond sodium. There are other electrolytes that are involved in the formula, correct? Which we
Correct. Need. Yeah. So most of the Gatorade products usually have sodium chloride and then a little bit of potassium in it. Usually sodium is the one that we focus on. And the reason for that is it outstrips the other minerals almost tenfold in terms of how much we lose when we are sweating. But Gatorlight, again, our newest product has kind of that five mineral blend. And that's really meant to really kind of mimic what you might get in terms of an oral rehydration solution. So something that's meant to get that fluid in our systems quickly, and then be retained within our cells as much as possible too. So it's got a little bit of sugar, helps get that fluid from our gut into our bloodstream, and then those minerals help get that fluid from our bloodstream into our cells and hang out there.
Which is great for recovery from other things too. A wild night out.
Definitely. It's my go-to, that's for sure.
Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that maybe that you would want people to know about what we've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, if we talked a little bit about protein for recovery, and I think, that's probably the number one focus for most people when we are in that recovery space. But I think one thing that gets overlooked a little bit is that carbohydrates are also important in recovery as well too. We are burning just vast amounts of glycogen when we're running, and we want to make sure that that's part of our recovery plan, is to replenish that glycogen. When we have burned all that glycogen when we're exercising, we take in the carbohydrate as kind of a way to keep that blood sugar high, make sure we're not bonking during exercise. But if we take it in after exercise, that's when we actually really start to replenish those glycogen stores and be ready for whatever the next session that is. If it's practice, if we have another, maybe we're a triathlete and we have another event or something like that. That's when we kind of want to start thinking about replenishing that glycogen.
Good point. Cindy, anything from you?
Yeah, no, I think that was great. I think that anyone who is listening will have some valuable information to take home and hopefully put into action. They've got 2 months yesterday to start to practice their nutrition during their runs, their recovery after their runs, to get ready for Georgina Marathon race day. Thank you for joining us, Anthony. We appreciate it. Yeah. Sandy, were you going to say something? Yeah, thanks for joining.
Thank you, Anthony.
We appreciate Gatorade's support of our events. Our athletes appreciate it. They can buy it from the store. They can easily access it to practice. So thank you again. And everyone will look forward to watching this and learning some valuable information.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.